And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics. Please find me at davesussman.com. You can find us all over the interwebs. Please find us at YouTube. Click the subscribe button, notification bell. That way you're updated on all of our new shows. Smash the like button. That's what the kids say today, so I have to say it. Smash the like button. You can also follow us on all of our podcast applications, including Apple Podcast, Ricochet. You can find the videos at Ricochet as well. And if you're not a member over at Ricochet, you're missing some of the best conversation on the internet. You can also find us at Stitcher, Google Play, and most likely your favorite podcast application of choice. And of course, you can find us at the new Range Broadcasting Network. Fantastic conversation, great content over there as well. We're proud to be a part of them. And you can just find us at rangebroadcasting.com. Today, we got a special twofer for you. We're going to be starting out with New York Times best-selling author with his 20th book out, Brad Thore. Yes, that Brad Thore. Backlash, Spymaster, The Last Patriot, Blowback, The Lions of Lucerne. The list goes on and on. His latest book, we're going to be talking about Near Dark. It's coming out on the 21st of July. We're going to be talking a lot about politics and Hollywood, and does he have a new series coming out, and a whole bunch of other really great stuff. Brad's a fantastic guy. I'm sure you've seen him. He's been all over, all kinds of media, mainstream media, Fox News, everywhere. And he's going to have some opinions of what is going to be happening in the next few months with the election. And speaking of the election, our second guest, we're delighted to have Joel Pollak. Joel B. Pollak. He is the senior editor at large at Breitbart News and host of Breitbart News Sunday on XM Sirius Radio. And I've been following Joel for years. He's a fantastic writer. He's prolific on Twitter as well. And his latest book just come out. It's called Red November. Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? I got the electronic copy here, and fantastic read. And we're going to get into journalism, what just took place with the New York Times and Barry Weiss. I want to talk to him about Breitbart News and what the future looks like right now for at least the next few months for election 2020. And of course, his book, Red November, what it all portends. Are we going to be heading the way of red socialism? And his book certainly goes into a lot of that. So please see the time code below. If you want to come back and not watch both interviews in a row, definitely come back and click on the time code. But you know what? Instead of doing that, pour yourself your favorite drink, sit back and relax, and enjoy the Whiskey Politics interviews with Brad Thore and Joel Pollak. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Brad Thore. He is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of over it's now 20 books. Is that right, Brad? 20?
Correct, 20. Yep.
Holy cow, nice round number for yourself. Your latest, you've got a whole bunch of bestsellers across the board here, but your latest is Near Dark, and that's going to be released, I think, on the 21st of this month?
Correct, July 21st. You got it.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on hitting number 20. Was that a goal for yourself?
You know what? It's a great round number, but I do a book a year, so it's kind of hard. I had to take a step back and say, wow, this is quite a landmark to hit 20. So it's a big deal.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. Folks, you've seen Brad everywhere, even if you don't know his books. He's appeared on ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS, Fox News Channel, and the list goes on and on and on. And he talks a lot about what he's writing about in his books, and essentially how that international intrigue today parallels what we're actually facing in the real world with the threats. And I just find your stuff absolutely compelling. So it's a pleasure having you on the show, Brad. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
So first of all, let's talk a little bit about, I want to talk about the book, and I want to talk about the lay of the land here as well, because you always seem to be so well versed in exactly the geopolitics of what is going on. I want to go straight to something that I actually spoke about a couple of episodes ago. I had a Navy SEAL, Special Navy SEAL, SEAL Team 6 guy on. He wrote a book called Mob 6. And he joined us, and his name was Justin Sheffield. And he joined us, and I asked him point blank, what the impact was of these news reports that were coming out regarding how Russia may be incentivizing hit squads in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Right? Let me ask you your impressions on that. I know there's rumors that may be true, it may not be true. We may not be happy to see what's happening, but what do you know about all of that?
Well, listen, I've got friends that are on the inside that I have not even asked. So, dear friend of mine is the national security advisor. I just talked to him a week ago, and I didn't bring it up because that is not. There are people that are in the know that I'm not going to even ask these questions of because I'm not cleared to get access to that kind of stuff. And but my buddy, the national security advisor, calls me. We talk about baseball. We talk about probably everything else other than the absolute grind of a job that he's got with COVID on top of everything. So what we do know is that the Russians have been out equipping, let's say, the Taliban for a while, and have been taking their sophistication level up and up and up. So it's the shoes on the other foot, right? We used to help the Afghans against the Russians, and now it's us, and it's completely the other side of the coin now. If there have been bounties, and the intelligence, if you know anything about intelligence, it is very rare that you get 100% certainty with intelligence. It's graded to a degree of certainty. If it made it into the president's daily briefing, which is what the White House admits that it did do, that's really, really serious. That is not a maybe this is happening. That is a high degree of certainty that this is happening. So I am leaning towards that is exactly what the Russians have been doing. And I base that on the fact that it made it into the PDB. So it's very, very serious and something that needs to be addressed, particularly by the president to Putin. There should be some very, very serious sanctions imposed on the Russians. This should be front and center every day on TV and in the newspapers until it's dealt with. It is an absolute dereliction of duty to ask men and women to go into harm's way and not address this, not absolutely put a knife to Putin's throat and say, if another service member dies over there, we're holding you responsible.
If you just watch the mainstream media, it sounds to me like Putin owns Trump. But Trump has been really strong on Russia, haven't they, with sanctions and other measures that we're not talking about in the media right now, aren't they?
Yeah, so there's been sanctions out of DC, but there has not been coordination with Trump. You send really mixed messages. There was the maximum pressure campaign with Kim Jong-un in North Korea. If the president is trying to be like, he's my best friend and we write love letters, or Putin's not a bad guy, while the sanctions are being imposed, they carry less weight. You're sending mixed messages. If you're disciplining children, the parents have to be together on it. To give you an example, you can't just say, okay, well, dad imposed this thing, but mom's going to turn around and give you a cookie. It needs to be coordinated, and Trump needs to get behind. There needs to be one message that applies to the State Department, the Defense Department, and the White House, and it needs to go out together. I don't like this mixed messaging, whether it's with the Chinese, and he's saying that Xi Jinping has been very transparent, and he's really doing a great job with coronavirus in China, and now we've got all these crackdowns and all this stuff that's coming, allegedly per the Bolton book. Trump kind of didn't care about the Uyghur camps, and now we're imposing all these sanctions even on companies and I think that's the correct thing to do, particularly with the companies that have been providing CCTV cameras and gate technology, which is like facial recognition stuff, where people's walk is as unique as a fingerprint. So they're applying that kind of stuff over there. And we should be sanctioning these companies. But President Trump needs to get behind the sanctions. He can't have it both ways. That sends a very bad mixed message. That is not how you effectively drive the politics the way you want it to go. It's got to be coordinated, and it isn't. It hasn't been. Whether it's China, North Korea, or Russia, it has not been coordinated. And that's a big mistake.
Do you think, it sounds to me a little bit of some criticism here. Do you think that is something that is being attended to right now, or is the personality getting in the way of policy?
Well, I think Trump was elected for his personality. Trump was not elected necessarily for all of his policies. He did come in with some, right? He had the wall. He was going to get rid of Obamacare. There were certain things. There were certain people that wanted the Muslim travel ban, which I think, again, was screwed up in the way that was rolled out. For instance, the administration added one other country, and this was not a Muslim travel ban. This was, if I had been in the communication shop, here's what I would have done for the travel ban. I would have said, listen, we're a brand new administration. President Obama put together this list of countries. This was President Obama's list. We've added one country to it because in none of these countries can you find somebody with an overdue library book, a parking ticket, or somebody that missed their rent payment last week. We should not be allowing these people on airplanes and to come into our countries. So what we're saying is once those countries get their acts together and can convince us that we are not getting bad guys getting on planes, at that point we'll lift this. But instead, they rolled it out, and it was very ham-fisted and created a lot of problems. I think because they're not organized, I think this is part of the problem of when you bring people in who don't have government experience, don't have diplomatic experience, and you try to roll these things out. You could have the best intentions. You could want to have you could have the noblest of intentions, but without a sophisticated, without a 360-degree view of how is this going to play in the media, I just think we give too many wins to the mainstream media on policies that probably could have gone the right way. And there's too many self-inflicted wounds, in my opinion. And it's because of a lack of experience in this realm. Yeah, that's why you got hired. But okay, you really need to get through the learning curve fast so that you can improve and get done what you need to get done. Get done what you promised people you were going to do. Don't give the other side ammunition to be shooting at you. And I think too often that's happened. Not because they're bad people in the administration, but because they complain about the media all the time. Stop playing their game. Don't let them get you. Don't give them an inch of daylight. And I think too often that's what happens.
I couldn't agree with you more. And it doesn't mean that I don't agree with Trump's policies, and I'm not scared to death of what the left want to push right now. But at the same time, I see this, and I think what you've just voiced is that in many cases he can be his own worst enemy. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, the polls are not going in the wrong direction for Donald Trump right now because Biden's making so many mistakes. Biden's not coming out. Biden's, oh my God, he's covered up and he's in. It's the smartest political ploy ever because Biden isn't the problem with Trump's polling numbers. Trump is the problem. So you're going to see more of this. But in 2016, as he was racing towards things, he tightened up. He got off Twitter. There were a lot of things he did. So he did show he could impose self-discipline upon himself. If he can do it again now, he's got a shot potentially. But Biden is going without doing anything. So that tells you there's problems within the camp. This is not a Biden issue that Biden's running away with it because he's being so brilliant. It's Trump
and the Democrats know that, and that's why they're hiding him. And we're seeing people, like Karen Tumulty in the New York Times suggesting that debates are archaic and there shouldn't be a debate because they know that's where the election can turn.
Well, and actually, yes, and President Trump was asking for more debates. And asking for more debates is a sign of weakness, actually, because what you're looking for is more chances where you can land a really good hook that can become a campaign ad and stuff like that. So the number one rule in politics is when your enemy is committing suicide, stand back, get out of the way. And that's exactly what Biden and the Democrats are doing now. So listen, it is a strength of Trump's that he has a gut that he believes in, and it's carried him for a long time. It's also an Achilles heel where he believes he is his own best advisor, and whatever his gut tells him is always the right answer. That's not necessarily true, but I don't know that you could convince President Trump of that. His gut has gotten, he's 74 years old? Look where it's gotten. To expect him to change at this point would require a lot of self-examination on his part. And this is someone who said he's never asked God for forgiveness because he's never made a mistake. So this is not necessarily a personality that you can change in the next 4 months. And I think it's going to be a difficult race to the finish here, and we're not going to know. We are not going to know. We know a lot of people don't tell pollsters the truth. They don't pick up the phone. Polls certainly were wrong. The overall average of the polls was right. Hillary Clinton was leading, and she did get more popular votes. Those polls were not pointing necessarily towards the 60,000 votes that made the difference in different swing states. So when people say, oh, the polls were wrong about Trump in the Trump-Hillary matchup, no, they weren't actually. If you go look at the Real Clear Politics polling average, they actually were more right on the money than they've ever been in the past. They really, really nailed it that Hillary was ahead in votes. But it isn't votes that matter. It's the Electoral College that matters. It's not the popular vote, as we all know.
Yeah, and one of the things that a lot of people, and I talked about this last night on the radio show, one of the things that a lot of people are talking about right now is that how essentially the polls are broken right now. That they're asking registered voters, not likely registered voters. In some cases, they're not even asking registered voters their opinions. And as you correctly stated, Brad, there's a lot of people, because of Black Lives Matter and the idea that this is a racist president, they just don't want to answer the question. And so that's going to be a really interesting unveiling on November the 4th when we wake up and see who won November the 3rd, of what those polls actually, were they correct this time around? Because I don't know. I don't know anybody that's polled. Landlines are going the way of the dodo bird. So it should be, I'm not too sure. But anyway, I want to, let me ask you a follow-up question to all this, because I want to get back to your book here as well and your career. I think with the way that you come across, as I've watched you being interviewed over the years, reading your books, you certainly come across as somebody with a right of center, real world perspective. It doesn't necessarily make you a conservative, but I think that a lot of people I get that impression. You can agree, disagree. Doesn't make
no. That's a fair. Yeah.
Okay.
Conservative. I got conservative and libertarian. I kind of say conservatarian.
Conservatarian.
I want the government to do the least amount of possible and to leave me alone, protect my rights as an individual, and let me raise my family and deal with my neighborhood and my neighbors the way I think is best for all of us.
I think we all agree with that. And John Gabriel's podcast over at Ricochet was the Conservatarians. That's exactly where we live. Government out of my pocket and my bedroom type approach, right?
Amen.
Now, you served as a member of the Department of Homeland Security's Analytic Red Cell Unit. And I mean, you were right there with intelligence. So as an author, you're not just pie in the sky on page as you fantasize about things. You were there. I think for your book, what was it? The Apostle, you actually toured with the Black Ops team in Afghanistan. So you've had your feet on the ground. You talk to these guys. I know that I just asked you, from the perspective of what's going on with Russia and Afghanistan, and that topic didn't come up. But what has been the response and the feeling to this president for those that that are serving?
Well, there's a lot. Trump enjoys a very, very high approval with members of the military. So if you're talking rank and file people, they really like him. They like his, they like him being tough against America's enemies. I think anybody should want the president to be tough with America's enemies. You also, now I'm the son of a Marine. My dad is no longer active, but there are certain qualities, particularly in the military, that we look for in our leaders. All right, getting on Twitter and insulting somebody about the way they look or nicknaming people, that's not exactly what we want to see in a commander-in-chief. So there are qualities that people really like about Trump and resonate with members of the military. He obviously has done great things as far as wanting to build the military back up. As somebody who doesn't like debt and deficits and considers it a national security issue, the more money we owe to places like China, that's a problem. But I also know that it is important to take care of our men and women in the military, and that is one of the most sacred oaths that we have, is to make sure that we equip them as best we can. So I certainly am not for taking money away from the men and women in military, but I've been disappointed in that. Okay, we've not disappointed that we've increased our budgets for the military, but that we haven't found savings elsewhere. All we've been doing is spending. We've thrown a tax cut in. It's going to be a problem at some point. And I believe that we don't own this country. We're merely stewards, and we maintain it and manage it for the next generation. And so there's several things we have to do. We have to hand over a freer, more successful, more prosperous, more secure nation than was handed to us. We have to do that responsibly, which means, yes, we want to keep our military edge, but oh, come on. We got to get our budgets under control. We got to get the debt, the deficit, all that kind of stuff. So it's a mixed bag. But Trump in the military, he enjoys very high support there. But you did see, after clearing out of Lafayette Park, where they cleared everybody out so Trump could go over and awkwardly hold up the Bible in front of St. John's Church, such an obvious photo op. Yeah. You got a lot of former, whether it's chairman from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, even Milley apologized for being a part of that, said he didn't know that's what he was going over to do. That was a mistake. And again, it's another self-inflicted wound. I think people are minute to minute in this administration and not looking at the big view of things. And I think that's part of President Trump lives in that Twitter world, right? Where it's all about the tweet. It's all about the existing news cycle. This administration happens at a pace that I don't think any administration has ever happened at before. And that's why we see some of these things where there isn't maybe all right, what's the long-term impact of this? Or how could our enemies turn this, enemies meaning whether it's the mainstream media or the other party, how could this be used against us? I think it's just, let's make a headline right now. This seems good. This feels good. My gut says it's good.
Were you surprised how General Mattis responded to his experience in the White House? I mean, it turned into kind of a brawl, online.
Yeah, it's tough. You've also got the Rex Tillerson thing where they had the meeting with the president at the Pentagon. Where they were trying to explain to President Trump that this is what they said was discussed in that room. I mean, these days I've always got to say, because people jump all over you weren't there. No, I wasn't there. But by the accounts of Tillerson and some of the other people, they were trying to walk the president through the history of NATO, what the West has meant since the end of World War II, how NATO plays a role in that. And it just wasn't jibing with how Trump saw the world. And that's when Tillerson afterwards called him a fucking moron, because it didn't fit with Trump's worldview. So this has been, and so anybody who criticizes the president, particularly people who've been close to him, then Trump goes after them. It's this counterpunching strategy. There is no embarrassment there. It's that, oh, well, this guy criticized me, now I'm going to insult him and call him a loser. Well, there's a long list of losers, Mr. President, who you personally have chosen to work very close to you. Why is it that the moment they criticize you, they become a loser? How did you not know they were a loser before you hired them? Why are you hiring so many losers? And we know they're not losers. Mattis is amazing. He's an incredible person. Tillerson, by all accounts, did a fantastic job in the private sector before he agreed to take the Secretary of State's job. Again, this is a leadership issue. This is a character issue when you come back to it. And it's unfortunate because I think the president does have some good instincts and does have some good ideas. And I'd always hoped that he could be more presidential. I hoped that he would rise to the level of the office. And in my estimation, as somebody who grew up with a Marine Corps father and was taught these are the things that matter in a leader, I have not seen the president rise to the level of the office. I've seen the office come down to kind of the apprentice star level and the insults and, I just don't like that. It is the most powerful position in the world, the most noble nation in the world. And I actually don't think the history books are going to be very kind to this type of if you want to call it leadership. I don't think it's going to be viewed very, very fondly by history or very well. Just my opinion, because it doesn't fulfill the criteria of what good leadership is, unfortunately.
Do you think the country's at a point right now where I think a lot of people, they don't follow it as closely as you or our viewers follow the news and they get in depth? It's basically just kind of a cursory, what is ABC 7 saying at the 6 o'clock Eyewitness News? And that's where they get, a little tidbit of information. So they form their opinions based upon whether they like somebody or they don't like somebody. And I understand why a lot of people don't like Trump, the person. Again, I support his policies, but sometimes he says things that just make me absolutely cringe. But I think you said it yourself that he could be presidential. We saw that at the 2020 State of the Union. I thought that was, bar none, probably the best State of the Union I've heard in maybe 30 years. Okay, it was fantastic. Even the left with Rush Limbaugh there still had to admit it was a very good speech. And then we saw Rushmore. It was a good speech, even though it was immediately defaulted back to racist and divisive by the New York Times and the Washington Post. But if you actually read it, it was a good speech. Can he be locked into that? Does this somebody you think has the power inside the White House, goes to the Resolute desk and say, Mr. President, stick to this and you win?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like Trump reading off a teleprompter. I actually prefer Trump when he's Trump because his heart's not in it most of the time when he's reading off the teleprompter, right? It's when he goes. You saw that at Rushmore. Yeah, and I've seen it other times in the Rose Garden and things like this, and you can tell he's never read the speech because I'll get to a point and, more Americans bought trucks last year, and then he'll stop and he'll go, that's pretty amazing, right? You can tell he's hearing it for the first time.
Yeah. So he's got his exposition on his own speech.
Yes. He's reading it for the first time. So I'll tell you what I thought was the most presidential for Trump is the first 2 press conferences he did with the coronavirus task force. He came out, he was solemn, he was stoic, he was serious. Those first 2, and I went on Twitter and I was like, okay, this is the moment he became presidential. It lasted for 2 days. And then it started getting into weird stuff and, the injecting cleanser and just this stuff where, again, he's so self-assured about his ideas and he's right that he would say, do you ever think, it's Clorox, basically, he was saying, it cleans it on surface. You ever think about putting that in the body? That's how convinced he is.
He was thinking out loud, and we know that was from UV. Can we take the effects of UV, which kills this thing, and put it into some kind of pill like Clorox? He was thinking out loud, and you can't do that as president.
And that's not the time. Exactly. You can't riff. And again, but he didn't get hired to be like all the other presidents. That's not what. Listen, I worked on Rick Perry's campaign. Okay, and I fought like hell to help Perry get it. And then when Perry didn't, I fought like hell to help anybody but Trump get it because I was concerned.
I saw him speak at when he came to California at the Camarillo hangar, the airport hangar. I met him, got my picture taken with him. Were you there?
No, not at that one. No,
okay.
I did some of the early primary states. I did the announcement when he announced in Texas.
Okay.
And then some of the early primary states, we bounced back and forth all over the place, New Hampshire and Iowa and so on and so forth. So, my concern all along, and people are like, oh, you don't like Trump's style. And I said, temperament gets reflected in style. What I'm afraid is that when the rubber meets the road, if we hit an emergency, that he does not have the personality or the temperament to deal with a really tough situation. This is what bothers me. My state is one of the 10 states that's now spiking with COVID. Okay. It's a red state. I live in Tennessee. They opened too fast, too early. We have a Democrat mayor in Nashville who's kept us locked down, and it was slowly reopening and is now rolling it back. So it's an interesting juxtaposition to see governors.
Do you think it was reopening early small businesses, or do you think it was more to do with the protests?
Well, I think it's a combination. So what Minneapolis for a while was tracking, and apparently there's a whole bunch of HIPAA stuff. You can't, and listen, I'm the libertarian conservative. I want my privacy protected. But you never ethically could have asked people to go out and mingle in bars during this or in protests. And it would have been a great public health question for everybody that goes in to get a COVID test. Optional, you don't have to answer this, but did you participate in any of the protests? Have you been in an enclosed space not wearing a mask? Because we could never conduct this ethically, but it would have been a great public health thing that we could say, okay, people outside without masks are catching it or they're not, but we don't have the information. So to be honest with you, I can't tell. And it might be, we have to be honest here, 2 things happen at the same time, the protests and people going into bars and hair salons and maybe not wearing masks and all that kind of stuff. We'll never know for sure. But the fact is, history will say it was a perfect storm. It was a perfect storm of people crowding into bars too quickly, not wearing masks, no social distancing, and protests. And unfortunately, all that time we spent shutting down the economy and staying home trying to flatten the curve, we wasted it. Now we're back to where we were. It's actually getting worse. And that's a shame because a lot of people have lost their jobs, have lost their businesses. And if the silver lining could have been we helped blunt this thing, but we didn't. That's also in our DNA, right? We don't want the government telling us what to do. We want to go out. We want to make our own decisions. And so sometimes your greatest strength can be a weakness. It can be turned against you, right? That's part of martial arts, using somebody's momentum against them. And the virus just doesn't care. The virus is just looking for cordwood to burn through, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you about being an author, because you have had one of the most successful careers, and I got to tell you, unfortunately, I lost one of my favorite authors a few years back, Vince Flynn.
Yeah, great guy.
Tragically no longer with us, too young. I thought you and Vince were 2 of the best authors in the game today. What is it about your genre, the spy thriller, the international espionage and all of that, that makes it so compelling that I can't put a book down in 2 nights I read through your stuff?
Well, it's very kind of you. Thank you. And you're right. Vince was taken way too soon. He gave me one of my first blurbs in my very first book, introduced me to his agent when I didn't have one. I didn't end up signing with Vince's agent, but he couldn't have been more generous. He was just a terrific, terrific guy. Yeah. Vince invented this genre, this kind of, it was different than Clancy, which was a lot of technological stuff. This is more about the man on the ground.
Clancy's an encyclopedia. It takes a lot to get through his books.
It does. My dad used to claim he was certain that Clancy got paid by the word, because there'd be all the description would be 3 chapters on how a missile worked,
Right.
And for me, Elmore Leonard once said that the best advice he could give a young writer is leave out the parts that people skip. And I never liked that stuff in the Clancy books. Just tell me there's 2 guys lasing the target and the missile hits where the laser is, and that's all I need to know. I don't need to know about the gyroscope and how fast the missile moves. I think what people enjoy about thrillers like mine is we all, we hear a lot about the Geneva and Hague Conventions. Mm-hmm. But the fact is, we've got a lot of enemies that either never signed the Geneva and Hague Conventions or completely disregard them. And when it comes to Islamic terrorism, they hide behind women and children. They hide in villages. You're at least supposed to appear with an armband on the field of battle if you're a signer to the Geneva and Hague Conventions, which ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they're not. So I think we love the idea. We want egg breakers to be out there. We want to know that there's people out there willing to break the rules if it's going to keep us safe. Yes, we're a great noble nation, and what sets us apart are our high ideals and in the expectations we hold everybody to, whether they're at the CIA, whether they're a SEAL, whether they're in Delta Force. But I think inherently we all want, if a guy's got to break a rule to take out these guys that are about to do something bad to Americans, we want them to go do it. That's our superhero. That's the closest thing in real life we have to superheroes, are these men and women. And they go out not for the paycheck. They do it for their love of the country. And I always say there cannot be an American dream without those willing to fight to protect it, to defend us, so that you and I can be on this podcast. We don't have to stand a post with a rifle right now or go kick in doors and try to get the bad guys. We couldn't have the America we do without those incredible warriors, be they in the intelligence community, law enforcement, or the military. So when I write those books, my goal is I want you to have a book that you want to take to the beach or to the lake and you zip right through it. It's really fast. But I also want you to learn a little bit about these men and women and what they face. And I love getting that mail, those emails from these folks who say, you know what, you nailed it. That's exactly the kind of stuff we're dealing with. Those are the tactics we use, or so on and so forth.
Absolutely correct. And there's always the psychology there. And it isn't just action, right? It isn't just James Bond, but there's backstory and there's a reality that people have to live in. And, when they're not in the theater, how is it impacting their lives? And I want to get your opinion on this, because this is something which is a very hard reality that we're facing right now. And I don't know how much you're hearing about it from people that that you've traveled with or you've spoken with, sources as well. But again, going back to my last interview a couple of weeks ago with Justin Sheffield, he wrote Mob 6. And he's talking about the fact that this is a very dark topic, but suicide rates, people coming home.
It's terrible.
And I got a friend of mine, I talked about this with Justin. He served as a Marine, Battle of Fallujah, and he's lost half of his unit at home from suicide. Think about that for a minute.
It's terrible. There was a story in the news a couple of days ago about one of our warriors who had nailed this great job at the Pentagon, had done all these deployments downrange, tons, and got this job. And by all outward appearances, this was somebody who, was going places, and he walked into the living room and committed suicide in front of his wife. It is the rate of veteran suicide is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, it's 20
the amount
a
of TBI, it's unacceptable. It is a national tragedy, and it is something that, I want to see cancer cured. Absolutely. I think it's great that we want to go to Mars, but how are we not doing a moonshot on veterans' health, whether it's traumatic brain injuries or it's suicide? How do we not have a moonshot going as a nation, where we're saying we're going to fix this within the next 4 years? That'd be a plank in my platform that I would say to President Trump, this ought to be one of the things that you're campaigning about. Make this our moonshot, our Manhattan Project. It is unacceptable to have one suicide a day. much less 20 with our vets. I don't want to see anyone. I don't want to see any American commit suicide. And who knows what we could learn for non-veterans with suicide if we could slow this down. But we owe our vets so much. So to allow this to go on, and again, this is something that should be front and center. We should be talking about every single day.
Yeah, and we try to here because this is the reality. And when you read your book, and I just got this yesterday, so forgive me, I haven't read it, but I'm going to tuck into it this weekend. I'm really looking forward to it. So you got to tell us a little bit about the book here. But when I focus on books like this, that is where my head goes right now, because I could see, friends of mine that have come home. And it's hard enough to assimilate. Listen, when your adrenaline is going at 1,000 miles an hour for a number of years, and you're in different theaters of combat, and then you're coming home and you're supposed to, I don't know, mow the grass or something, right? And help Junior with homework. There's got to be a shift. And the Veterans Administration, I understand, are trying to address this. And there's been some reforms at the VA. What are you hearing about that? And, is there something you said? I don't know if you're planning on running for politics one day. I'd love to have you on national office. But this would be a plank in your platform. What are you hearing right now about what's going on with the VA?
I'm not hearing much from inside. And I think, boy, if there was any part of the swamp that needed to be drained, that's it. I mean, we have a healthcare system devoted to our veterans. How would we not make that the absolute best of the best of the best? How would we not hold that up as an example? America's got great healthcare. Look at Johns Hopkins, look at the Mayo Clinic. I mean, we have the ability, we have the talent, we have the know-how in this country. So if the focus is not put there, again, this is the president can lead by establishing priorities. And this is one area where I really would have liked to have seen a greater emphasis. He's got the best bully pulpit. There is no better bully pulpit in the United States than this. And we certainly owe it to our veterans. And I'm sorry they're not seeing the kind of health care that they really deserve. Again, they risk more than anybody else. We ought to be willing to reward them with more. A reward even seems like the wrong word. We need to show our thankfulness by taking care of them and taking care of their families, because the families serve too, right? These men and women go down range and their families stay home worried about, are they going to come back?
Right.
There is no more noble thing you can do than to sign that blank check saying to the United States of America, up to and including my life. I can't think of anything more noble. And the thanks we give them needs to be commensurate, needs to be equal, if not more, in value than what they're offering to sacrifice for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of veterans, Scott Harvath has returned in your newest book?
He's back. I tell people that my books
Near
are
dark.
like James Bond. Yeah, Near Dark. Thank you. They're like James Bond movies. You do not have to have seen the other Bond movies to appreciate the newest one.
Right.
So if you haven't read any of my other thrillers, Near Dark's a great place to start. The premise is that $100 million bounty has been placed upon America's top spy, who's Scott Harvath. He's an ex-SEAL Team 6 guy who gets into the espionage business, $100 million bounty. I painted myself into a corner last year where I agreed to do a bonus chapter for the lovely folks at Barnes & Noble so they can have a special edition. And it's like the end of a Marvel movie where the credits come up, and if you sit in the theater, you get another scene at the end. My kids love those. And so I did this bonus chapter with last year's book, and it was somebody taking out $100 million bounty on Harvath. Short-sighted on my part, painted me into a corner for this year because it's part of the Harvath universe now, right? He can't just wake up and say, "Woo, what a bad dream, that $100 million bounty." And so I reached out to friends of mine and I said, "Hey, if this was you and somebody put this kind of a price on your head, how would you fix it?" And they all said the only way to kill a contract like this is to kill the person that put it out on you. You have to reverse engineer it. They think it's cat and mouse. You need to show them you're actually the cat. You may be the cat with a $100 million bounty on his head, but you need to start piecing it together, reverse engineer it, go back. So I've got Scott. I've got this beautiful, super, just as broken, troubled. He's very broken down in this. So we talk about a lot of those issues with a lifetime spent of service and what it can do to you, and that sputtering flame of humanity that really doesn't take much of a gust of air to blow it out. And that's where we start with Harvath in this. And he teams up with this fantastic Norwegian intelligence operative. She's fantastic. And the two of them have such broken, troubled past that they actually fit very well together. And it sets off this great adventure. My idea was give readers a super escape. I had this book done before I knew COVID was coming. And I'm really glad this is the story I did for this summer. because it is just start the book on page 1, and I hope before you know it, it's 3 a.m. and you're at the last page.
Yeah, that's how I read your books. Absolutely, I can't put them down. And you have, you know, the reoccurring character, and it's kind of like Mitch Rapp for Flynn, right? I mean, you know, you just pick it up. Flynn, there was a movie, I guess, American Assassin, that came out.
Yeah, Dylan O'Brien. Yep.
Yeah, what did you think of that?
Well,
Michael Keaton was
Michael Keaton did a great job.
Yeah,
Yeah, Michael Keaton
Hurley.
as Stan Hurley. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
There was a lot about that movie that I liked. Hollywood makes a lot of interesting decisions, right? So Dylan O'Brien brought with him a certain fan base. You know, there's a certain age group that'll go and buy tickets again and again and again to see a movie.
I didn't know who he was.
Yeah. So I didn't see him necessarily as, so this was, for me, this is the problem of Vince not being there to ride herd on the movie, right?
Right.
So there were things that the young Mitch Rapp was doing that there's absolutely no way Stan Hurley would have put up with it. The minute he broke the first rule, either they would have shipped him home or they would have duct taped him and put him in a trunk of a car and left him there till they were done with the op. There's no way they would continually let him do that stuff. I still enjoyed the movie. My daughter loves Dylan O'Brien. I'd always heard that Gerard Butler was one of
I think he aged out.
He may have. I mean, you can't.
Yeah.
So, you know, this was an interesting book, American Assassin, for Vince, because it was going back. This was the origin story pretty much for the Mitch Rapp character.
Yeah.
For Vince. So you had to start with the younger. You couldn't go to Gerard Butler. But I think because my household, we had watched all the Maze Runner movies and we knew Dylan O'Brien as this teen heartthrob. That's always the question that's hardest for producers. Does the movie make the star or does the star make the movie? And so Sean Connery, nobody knew him. Great James Bond. Immediately, that's Bond. So there's a lot about the movie that I liked. I thought the action was really well done. I thought the scenes were really well filmed. There was a good intensity to it. But my wife is a doctor. She won't watch ER or anything like that because she'll pick the little things that they get wrong, you know, whether it's the wrong drug or no, you'd never put the IV in before doing this. So it is tough to watch. I'm sure it'll be tough for me to watch my own stuff at some points. But
I was going to ask you about that. You know, discussions. What's going on with and are you going to have a say in who gets to play your characters?
Yeah. So I joke that in a town like Hollywood, filled with beautiful people, we have kissed every frog in Los Angeles, right? So we've had a bunch of options where, for whatever reason, there's been a change of executives and they scrap the whole slate and want to do a whole bunch of different things. You know, we've had deals with studios and stuff. We have something going right now where I actually had one of the biggest producers in Hollywood come to me and say, I want to do this. I want you to be involved with it. And in fact, I'll even let you pick the director.
Is it on one of your books or a new series?
Yeah, no, it's for my bundle of books. And I said, I get to pick the director. And the producer said, yeah, I've got that kind of juice. I can get you whatever director you want. And this is a huge producer. I'm like, okay, who do you think would be good for it? He gave me a list of 3 people. And the top guy on his list was the guy that I've always wanted to do it. And I can't say who it is.
You can't share?
I
won't tell anybody.
There's I know, you're not going to say anything. So he said, I said, okay, how's this going to happen? He goes, what are you doing in an hour? I'll get him on the phone. And I was like, you got that? He's like, yeah, I got that kind of pull. Got on the phone. We just clicked, got along like a house on fire. And so the director said, here's the way I'll do this. If you're involved, okay? You know the Scott Harvath universe better than anybody else. You know this world. There's so many different things we want to do here and spin-offs and all this kind of stuff. We essentially are going to create a Marvel universe, but based on your universe of 20 books. Okay,
I'm like giddy right now. You have no idea. This is really exciting.
But I've been left at the altar so many times, Dave, that I temper my excitement. So we're trying to get everything set up so that the moment COVID lifts, we've got scripts written.
Are you talking big screen, streaming, what?
Talking about a combination of TV and film. We want to do both and then also have things ready for spin-offs for different characters like my Troll and things like this. So the director said, I'm only doing this if this is bigger than Bond. That was what the director said. He said, I want this to be bigger than James Bond.
Folks, if you haven't read any of Brad's books, you have no idea what this news is. This is amazing. I mean, besides Casino Royale, you know, Bond, there hasn't been a great Bond in 15 years. I mean, you know, this is great news. Really great news.
So big budget. I mean, these are 2 high power Hollywood players who get big money for
Who
their
can you
work.
share
So,
who you're seeing playing Scott?
you know what? At this point, we came to this agreement that it should be that the movie makes the star, as opposed to the other way around.
Okay,
we do
great.
not want to grab somebody who's well known, where you say, "Yeah, I can't get it out of my head that he played this other role." So we are going to take
like John
somebody that's relatively
Krasinski
unknown.
with Ryan,
Jack
right?
Ryan.
Jack Ryan.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
So here's the deal. I loved Krasinski in 13 Hours, the Benghazi movie.
Yes.
I thought he was
Outstanding.
Great.
Yeah.
I liked season 2 of Jack Ryan better than season 1. I thought
Really?
my dad's a Marine. I know a lot of Marines.
Okay.
I wasn't getting the Marine Corps vibe.
That was the
off of
Venezuela plot?
That was the second thing was Venezuela. So
Yeah.
Venezuela was season 2. Season 1 was all about the woman trying to get away from the bomb maker or Muslim.
And you liked the
husband.
Venezuela plot better.
I liked Jack Ryan's character. I thought it was written better. I thought he had a little more grit, a little more edge. You know, they introduced him as Dr. Ryan, and I know all that kind of stuff, but they were playing up the analyst thing, and he was. That's not a Marine. It's true to Clancy, but his ethos was not the Marine Corps ethos. You don't suddenly kind of get soft and become an analyst when you've been a Marine. That doesn't happen. So I didn't get the Marine Corps edge in the character that I thought should be there. But by the same token, there wasn't a ton of Marine Corps edge, in my opinion, in Harrison Ford either. Like Patriot Games, he did good stuff, but it's hard to imbue a character with that.
Did you like Harrison over, who was that, Alec Baldwin, Red October?
Listen, I loved Ann Archer. I always thought she was super hot, super sexy. So I love like Patriot Games. And what's really cool is when I was in school at USC, I got to go to a test screening of Patriot Games, see an alternate ending and vote and say, I didn't like the ending. So I was part of a test audience that they went back and redid, if I remember correctly, the ending of Patriot Games to fix it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and what was the other one? Some of All Fears. What was
Some of All Fears, and Willem Dafoe was in that with Harrison Ford.
Yeah. No, I think it wasn't Harrison in that one.
Oh no, Ben Affleck. Sorry, that was Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck.
Yeah, with the nuke and the football game.
Yeah,
and all that
Baltimore,
kind of stuff.
Baltimore Stadium. Yeah.
So I liked Alec Baldwin, and I liked it. So Alec Baldwin and Harrison Ford, I like more than Ben Affleck. Yeah. But I don't like Ben Affleck because I used to love Alias because I think Jennifer Garner is one of the hottest actresses ever. And, she was great. She married Ben Affleck, and there was no more Aliens. So I blame Ben Affleck for taking Jennifer Garner away from me.
Nothing to do with
I have to be honest.
They took away your show.
That's it. I cannot lie.
Yeah. So, listen, critics have been absolutely raving about Near Dark. And like I said, I'm going to tuck into it this weekend. I just got it yesterday. So, unfortunately, I had the show last night and haven't had a chance to get into it. But everything I'm reading right now is I can't wait. And, just keep churning them out, man, please. And keep yourself healthy and get tested for everything because Vince was a huge loss to all of us. And, what you're doing is fantastic. And I'm really, really excited about this news with you creating content, television or movies, whatever that may be. When do you think you might be making some announcements on that?
I don't know. We've got we're getting very close to having the team complete. So they're finishing up doing the key hires for basically the people that are non-actors. So you pull together the producers, you get a director, you bring in a showrunner for the TV portion of it, who basically runs the writers' room. So there's all these, and you look at a cinematographer, director of photography. There's all these little pieces. So we're putting the full package together, and then going to decide where the financing comes from, whether that's a streaming service, whether it's a studio. We see what happens. And at that point, once the deal is locked in and the money's in, then these guys are going to make an announcement, and I'll be part of that announcement. So,
are you requiring approval on all scripting? Because that's your sandbox, right?
Yeah, not approval per se. I want to be part of the writing process. So my thing is what can I do to help make the projects better? I don't want to teach you. I don't want to tell you how to make your movies or make your TV shows. I just want to make sure that they're accurate. There's no safeties on Glocks and that kind of nonsense. Or, hey, if you do that in this episode, understand that the arc of the books, you're going to need to get here by the end of it. And this may screw you up. You may want to save that. It's cool, but save it for episode 3 or save it for the movie. Okay. So that's what I want to do. I want to make sure that they have the biggest success possible and just be there to serve the productions in any capacity I can. And they're cool. There's no egos. This is what's insane. It is the coolest, most down-to-earth group of professionals with unbelievable resumes. I didn't think people like this existed in Hollywood, and I'm blown away by how fabulous they are. So, for all the stutter starts I've had, the false starts, it is worth it. If all of those were building blocks to get me with these incredible men and women that I'm dealing with right now, it's all worth it. The long wait has been worth it. I'd rather take this much time and create something fantastic than to have gotten kind of a not so good thing done 10 years ago.
Brad, greatly appreciate you taking the time, man. I'm really excited. I'm really excited. Hope it's on Netflix or Amazon. I don't think I've got too many of the other streamings. But anyway, that's Near Dark. Everybody check out his book. It's being released July the 21st, is it?
Yep, Tuesday the 21st.
21st. And everybody, I'm sure, Amazon and everywhere else, we'll have links down below.
Everywhere else.
Okay,
yeah,
and check them out. And Brad, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate you taking the time. Best of luck with this book. Best of luck with the series. I can't wait. I'm going to be sitting with bated breath, and I'll probably binge that all in a couple of days as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And by the way, where can folks find you? Social media?
Yeah, bradthor.com is the best place.
Okay.
And that's got links to all my social media there.
Brad Thor, thank you so much. Best-selling author. And we'll have to have you back on again down the road, especially after this series comes out. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Well, I don't know about you. First of all, I love that interview. That was fantastic. I'm so excited. Holy cow. You put a series like a Brad Thor book on film, and it's done well. And if Brad's involved in it, it's going to be done well. And it sounds like he's got a pretty heavy hitter as a producer. Wow. Who is it? Ron Howard, do you think? Or who do you think it's going to be? Anyway, listen. I don't care. If it's done well, I'll sit through and binge 10 episodes in 2 nights. I promise you. That's the kind of fan that I am. So anyway, that was a lot of fun. Thank you, Brad, for joining us. And best of luck with the book, Near Dark. I'm looking forward to diving into that one myself. But in the meantime, speaking of books, our second guest is Joel Pollak. Joel B. Pollak is the senior editor at large at Breitbart News and host of Breitbart News Sunday on SiriusXM and Patriot. You can find that on satellite. And his newest book, Red November, Will the Country Vote Red for Trump or Red for Socialism, just came out. Really excited to be talking about that, as well as the election and journalism and everything else. Welcome to the show, Joel. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on. I've been reading your work for years now, and I can't believe, we've been doing this for 4 years, that this is the first time we're having you on. But so welcome. I'm excited to speak with you. So first of all, I got to get your impressions on everything, because you wrote this book through the primaries, and I want to talk about this a little bit here. But did you ever imagine the past 6 weeks, as you were writing, just how crazy the left has gotten? Could you ever predict what we've seen?
No, although one person who did predict it was Andrew Breitbart. And I quote him in the book. He said in 2012, in one of his last speeches, that the country faced a choice, which was one of 2 directions. We could either go the direction of Tea Party, which was, in his mind, restoration of the Constitution and the founding principles, or we could go in the direction of Occupy. And he was referring to Occupy Wall Street, the anarchists and socialists who took over large swaths of public and private property at the end of 2011. And that's the choice we face today. And you can see that dilemma playing out, that the Tea Party movement effectively found its echo in Donald Trump, and Donald Trump restored what many conservatives believed had been missing from American government, a commitment to basic principles, to checks and balances. I also explain in my book, and as I've argued online, Donald Trump is more faithful to the Constitution than Barack Obama was by a mile. And Democrats, of course, see it differently, but they're not actually thinking about the real Constitution as it is. They're thinking about the Constitution in their minds, which doesn't exist. And Trump has actually restored the way the American system was supposed to work. On the other side, you have Black Lives Matter and Occupy and anarchists, the Antifa people, socialists. All of that comes from 8 or 9 years ago, the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was endorsed by Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. Democrats have a habit dating back to that time of rioting when they don't win elections. We saw that after the Tea Party wave of 2010 with the attempt to occupy the Wisconsin Capitol in Madison to prevent Scott Walker from making reforms to public sector unions, and it just rolled on from there. They just rioted or protested if they could not get their way at the ballot box. And we've reached a point where Democrats have been willing to turn the country inside out to get rid of Donald Trump.
You know, you mentioned Occupy Wall Street, OWS, and I remember, watching that just absolutely. I think most people were just they were incredulous. What they were seeing in the streets there was abhorrent. There were people that were being raped. There was all sorts of violence that was taking place. Now that looks like, just a walk in the park. We're seeing across the country in almost every single city. You talk about tearing down the country just to get rid of Donald Trump. Who are the adults in the room right now? Because when I take a look at, Portland, for example, the mayor is just kind of like, yeah, really, we don't need Trump and his military to come in. And meanwhile, there are people that are being killed. There are cops that are being attacked right now. Do they have a direction? Does the left have a direction and an end game here? Or is it just burn the MF down?
Well, the revolution always eats itself. So the purpose of revolution is always more revolution. That's why every socialist or communist regime speaks constantly of revolution. I mean, in Cuba, which is a dictatorship, the joke is that the revolution has been going on for 60 years already. But in South Africa, where I lived for quite some time, you have a democracy, but the ruling party refers to its policy as the National Democratic Revolution. They've been in power for almost 30 years, and they still refer to themselves as a revolutionary movement. So this is a common idea on the left, that the messy business of politics, of actually getting elected or getting into power, is only one stage of the revolution, and the job of the ruling party is then to transform the society. That's why when Joe Biden starts saying things like fundamentally transforming the United States of America, he talks about revolutionary institutional changes. That's a direct quote from the Washington Post. That when he starts talking like that, and he's been sort of a straight down the middle Democrat for most of his 50 years, he's moved so far to the left that I think the choice facing American voters in November is really not a choice between two political parties, but really two political destinies. We're either going to be a constitutional republic with leaders who have flaws and checks and balances and all that, or we're going to be a revolutionary socialist society, which goes the way every revolutionary socialist society has gone, which is straight downhill.
I want to divert a little bit here because I really would love to get you to know your story. You're the senior editor at large, and you're also the in-house counsel over at Breitbart News. And before you were with Breitbart, you were a Tea Party candidate, if I read correctly, over in Illinois for Congress. And you were also a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. But you were born in South Africa. And I noticed that you became a citizen 2 years before I became a citizen. I'm originally from England. In 1989, and you got your degrees from Harvard and master's degrees from Cape Town U. First of all, people ask me all the time, where's your accent? And secondly, how did somebody with your background end up becoming so prolific in conservative journalism?
Well, those are great questions. So I was born in South Africa. I grew up in the United States, and I never had an accent except maybe when I was a kid living at home, before I went to preschool or whatever. I think there are some family memories of me pronouncing things in the South African way. I also have some English roots, by the way. My grandmother was born in London and grew up during the Blitz. So I share that lineage. Yeah. But I started out on the left, actually, and being from South Africa had something to do with that, in the sense that my parents were fairly liberal. I had members of my family who were involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And I also grew up with a sense of liberal white guilt, in the sense that I knew my parents had enjoyed privileges in South Africa that were only due to their race. That was real systemic racism. Apartheid was a system of reserved labor, reserved opportunities for whites, exclusion of blacks, discrimination against blacks. My wife, who's born in South Africa, was born in a segregated hospital and could not go to typical white schools for the first couple of years of her life, and then everything changed. So the journey I began was on the left, and I thought I had an obligation to think through how politics could be used to change society. And I actually went back to South Africa as a Rotary Scholar after I finished college here, and really got into the politics of South Africa, really started writing, started working on freelance journalism there. And over time, my ideas about politics really changed, because I saw the policies that the South African government, the new government, was using, and they were socialist policies for the most part. Although on the left, they said the South African government was too beholden to the IMF and the Washington Consensus, the neoliberal consensus. There was some truth to that, but the ideology of the ruling party was still very socialist, and it still colored the way they governed. And I just saw that it didn't work. It just did not work. The kind of things that Black Lives Matter is demanding, this kind of racial justice and social revolution or redistribution, I've seen all of that. You've seen all of it in South Africa. And if it had a chance to work, it really would have worked in South Africa, because in South Africa, you had a very rich, upper class, highly skilled, with huge resources, massive mineral resources, but also a well-developed infrastructure. And South Africans like Elon Musk have gone on to change the world. I mean, we don't think of Elon Musk as a South African, but he grew up in Pretoria, and by way of Canada, came to the United States and is now planning to move to Mars, basically. But there's that kind of skill and drive in the South African people, but it's been dulled and deadened by the socialism of the African National Congress, the Party of Liberation, which never wants any liberation to happen again. And that really changed my mind. And when I came back to the United States, I looked at American politics in a completely new way. So do you want the rest of the story about how I met Andrew?
I find it fascinating. No, I think it's really interesting, and it's fascinating how people evolve based upon real life and true experiences. I had somebody on the radio show last night. She was a former, communist Czech citizen. She moved to the United States, and she's scared to death right now that America is heading towards what she left. And she says, we got to stop this. And nobody seems to want to stop it. And you guys are voicing this over at Breitbart, one of the few publications that are out there. It's certainly marginalized by mainstream media, but you guys are presenting a tremendous amount of incredible, compelling stories and such. And I'd love to get your opinion on journalism as a whole as well before we get into your book, because what you guys are talking about over at Breitbart is kind of shining a light on this. For example, Barry Weiss, a resignation letter over at New York Times, she essentially stated that Twitter should now be on the masthead of the New York Times, that the blue check marks are controlling the narrative. You've been talking about this for quite some time, haven't you?
Yeah, and well, as a company, I mean, we tweet, and we have a Twitter account, and individuals tweet and that sort of thing. But we've long had an internal skepticism of Twitter. Before Twitter began censoring conservatives, there were some at Breitbart who deleted their Twitter accounts because they thought it was a waste of time. Matt Boyle, our political editor, used to be very active on Twitter, and then he just left a few years ago and said his life has never been the same ever since. He's so much happier since he left Twitter. But Twitter is actually a source for a lot of stories for us, because we do a lot of coverage of Hollywood. Actually, Breitbart started out covering Hollywood. That was the very first thing. Big Hollywood. And a lot of our Hollywood stories come from the stupid things celebrities do on Twitter. Alyssa Milano, or today, what was the one today or yesterday? Rob Reiner saying that Trump deliberately wants to kill as many children as possible. So there you have a Hollywood A-list director and producer saying something bizarre. I've met him a number of times, by the way. I won't go into the circumstances, but he's quite a nice guy in person, but he's just totally cracked politically. And what Barry Weiss described is correct. I mean, Barry Weiss has been very anti-Trump. I would argue she's treated Trump supporters at times the way that she got treated by the New York Times newsroom. But her point is correct, that journalists are living on Twitter. And you talk about journalism. My previous book, which was called How Trump Won, was about my experiences on the campaign trail. And I wrote about traveling with the press. And what would often happen is we'd get to a campaign stop, and there'd be an area for the press to work. And during the speech or the event, often I would see journalists just spending their entire time on Twitter, not speaking to people in the crowd, not even paying attention to what was happening on stage, because they would just get the pool transcript later and they would file their report, but actually just snarking on Twitter. And there's a competition among elite journalists to get the most retweets, the most likes, the most followers. And it's the same today as it was in 2016. There's a dominance hierarchy, if you will, kind of a primate, tree in Twitterland, and people behave abominably. People do things and say things. They even think things they wouldn't think in a normal social setting. And I am very much in favor of technology. I like social media in general, but I think that it's not a substitute for interpersonal relationships and interactions. And the problem is, I think in America today, we're just so much online, and that's compounded by the shutdowns and coronavirus and so forth. We can't have conversations about race, for example, that are honest, because so much of the conversation happens on Twitter, social media, if it happens at all. But if you say the wrong thing, a tweet lives forever. If you try to delete it, they'll screenshot it, and then you lose your job, you lose your reputation, your friends. So it's really a rough world out there.
Yeah, I got to ask you this because you're a lot more involved on Twitter than I am. I check it every day just for the journalists that I like, you being one of them, to see what's going on. But I don't really interact with too many people on it. Quite frankly, I find it's cancerous. I find I don't feel good. Like I just don't feel good being on Twitter. But it is a source of news. Adam Carolla last night on Daily Caller, he was interviewed, and it's a pretty good interview. And he said that, we live, if we're lucky, 76, 80 years on this planet. Is there going to be one of us on our deathbed that says that I wish I spent more time arguing with strangers on Twitter? Where is this push come from in the past 5 to 10 years for people to speak? I mean, there's some people that friends of mine, they're very well known on Twitter, blue check marks, got, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers. And they, every time I go on, I see that they're interacting with people. Where does that push come from, or that incentive come from, to spend their entire lives on that medium?
Well, you mentioned something in your opening to that question, which was about it doesn't make them feel good, or it doesn't make you feel good.
Yeah.
Social media is designed to make us feel good if we do certain things. And there's a little dopamine rush you get, like a little drug, if you get a lot of retweets. And I am as much an addict as anybody else. I mean, I don't spend that much time and effort on Twitter, but I do tweet several times a day. And at times when you're tweeting, you try to design your tweet so that it will get recirculated, and you're always pleasantly elated when it does. I mean, probably the best tweet I had, and I mean, this is such a dad joke, so my wife was making fun of me for tweeting this, but around the time of the Chaz, remember the Chaz,
Yeah.
which became the CHOP or whatever?
Yeah.
The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, it was called, in Seattle. So I joked and said, well, because they're they were knocking down all the statues at the same time. So that's the context of the joke. Knocking down statues of George Washington and so forth. So I said, because of, it's going to take me so much more effort to tell you this short tweet, but I'll tell you anyway. The state of Washington, obviously named after George Washington. So I said, given that Washington was a slave owner, they should rename the state the Seattle Pacific Autonomous Zone. And the acronym for that was SPAZ. And
that's great.
Well, yeah, it's a silly little joke, but what made it fun was that President Trump retweeted it, and that's like, you get a celebrity to retweet a joke. I never had a bigger tweet than that, and I don't know what he gained out of it. I had a lot of fun, for a few hours.
It's great. I've got several friends of mine who've been retweeted by Trump, and that's for them. I mean, it doesn't get much better, right?
Yeah, it's funny that he retweets a bad joke that I made, or at least a sort of dad joke. No, but nothing more serious.
So we're not allowed to say that word anymore. But that takes me back to Bill Murray meatballs. Right. So Joel, your book, and this is I've gone through it. I got a digital copy. It's essentially Red November. Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? Which is kind of ironic because we talk about red, in the United States, how NBC changed it from blue to red back after the 1984 election when Ronald Reagan trounced Mondale. But if you go, I don't know what it is in South Africa, but if you go to England, blue is conservative, right? It's the Reds that are the socialists, the Labour Party. But talk a little bit about you as a conservative journalist. You said you went behind the enemy lines to cover the 2020 Democrat primaries. Talk a little bit about that, if you can, your experience and how you turned that into a book.
Well, I should first say that, I don't think my fellow Americans are enemies. It's just a figure of speech. But at times it did feel like I got that kind of strong opposition. I was kicked out of a Beto O'Rourke event for no reason whatsoever. It was at a historically black college. And I had been at a press conference the night before at another Beto O'Rourke event. Remember, he's the former representative who was an early favorite for the nomination for about 5 minutes. And he had an event the night before at the College of Charleston in front of a predominantly white audience. And they had a press conference after that, and I asked him a couple of challenging questions. And that was that. And then I went the next day to Benedict College, which is a historically black college. And the students were incredible. I mean, they showed me around. I could not find this event. It was in some obscure building. And students took me there. I mean, campus was happy to have me there. But I get in the room, and the Beto people eventually found out who I was. I don't know why it mattered, because there were a lot of journalists there. But it says I wear my press credentials, Breitbart and everything. And one of the staffers must have raised the alarm, and they had a policeman escort me off campus. And I was threatened with arrest if I didn't leave. And they later explained or tried to say that I had been disruptive at previous events, which is just nonsense. I mean, it's complete nonsense. It was just made up. So they got called out on that. And then they said, well, we did it to protect the other students. We felt we were protecting the students in the room from this, Breitbart reporter. I mean, there are 200 people in the room, and they're going to be afraid of me. And all I was doing was live streaming Beto speaking at this town hall at a black college. I mean, I did that a lot. I just live streamed things, and Breitbart readers and viewers got an inside look at a lot of Democratic events the mainstream media weren't covering just because I was there. In fact, we do a lot of that. Some of the best coverage of the Black Lives Matter protests has come from Breitbart video. We get our team on the ground and we record what's happening. The media don't want to do that anymore because the protests have become so embarrassing for the left. But we show up at protests, and we've gotten some incredible exchanges on video. And that's one of the reasons we have one of the top Facebook pages of any news website, is because we just get this kind of content. In fact, at one point, the New York Times was linking to our content, our live stream, on Twitter. I think it was for a Second Amendment protest, or it may have been for one of the anti-shutdown protests. I think it was in Virginia or somewhere. But the New York Times was linking to our live stream because we were the only ones there. So, I did that kind of reporting throughout the Democratic primary. I really got into these events. And sometimes it was difficult. I have to say that Bernie Sanders people, as radical as they were politically, were probably the best for media up until the end. At the end, they got a little bit difficult, probably because there was so much international interest in their campaign. People thought Bernie was going to win, and so it was very hard to get into his events. But up until that point, they were extremely open. If I had questions, the Sanders people got back to me, which is not always a given when you're at Breitbart and you want to ask a Democratic candidate some questions. The interviews I did in the spin room with Bernie were just straightforward. His staff was always accessible. So it wasn't always this kind of enemy atmosphere. But at times it was. And I think it was a foreshadowing of where we are right now.
You talk about in the book just how extreme the Democrats have become. And, at the beginning of our interview, you talked about OWS, Occupy Wall Street, and we saw the seeds of that being, planted there. We can go all the way back, 4 or 5 decades and see the seeds being planted. But what has taken place just in the past few years? I thought 2016 was tumultuous. But it's like 2016 said, hold my beer, right? I mean, what happened in the past few years? Is it just Orange Man bad, that he's just bringing out the worst in people, or is it something else?
Well, there's something to that, not because he's bringing out the worst, but have you seen the Matrix movies?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So conservatives like to talk about the moment where Neo takes the red pill. The hero takes the red pill, which allows him to see beyond the reality he's in and to see the system behind it. And a lot of people who supported Trump felt that they had similar experiences. They called themselves red-pilled, and they could see the media lying. They could see the Washington establishment imposing policies on America that weren't good. And they, like Trump, saw through all of the political rhetoric, and Trump developed this following among this similarly red-pilled. Now, in the sequel to The Matrix Reloaded, the bad guy, Agent Smith, who you think that the hero has destroyed in the first movie, comes back. But in the second movie, like Neo, like the hero, Smith is also red-pilled. Smith is outside the system. The experience of being defeated by a human being has released him from the constraints of the computer program he was designed to be part of. And so Smith comes back as a free agent, just like Neo. And Smith decides to infect all this computer software, and he starts to take over the system. And that's what we are seeing. This is the Matrix Reloaded. That's what we're living in right now, where Trump is sort of the Neo who takes our perceptions of politics and shows us how much of a game everything is, sees right through it and defeats it. But in so doing, he's also liberated the establishment. He's liberated his political enemy to operate outside of constraints. And that's what's happened. It's now Neo versus Smith outside the system. Before it was just Neo versus the Matrix. And now it's Neo versus Smith and everybody's outside the Matrix. The Matrix still works, it's still an enemy, just like in the sequel to the Matrix and the Matrix Reloaded, the computers are still the bad guys.
Yeah.
So we are still facing, the mainstream media and hostile Washington policy establishment and all these things that conspire to prevent Trump from carrying out his policies. But in addition, you've got the left completely unleashed. Basically, they figure that if Trump can do this by breaking some of the rules, well, we're just going to break all the rules.
It's a really interesting metaphor. Who are the people in Zion? The naked orgies that just ruined that movie, in my opinion.
When you find out where those are, will you tell me?
But now, my point is, in that metaphor, is that us? Is that the left?
It's the conservative media.
Okay.
Zion, in a sense, is to stretch this metaphor a little bit. It's the space in which people can be themselves, and that space is increasingly under attack.
Gotcha.
And there are little new efforts all the time to create new things. So I'm on Parler, for example, which is the new free speech platform, the alternative to Twitter, and that'll hold out for a while, maybe for a long time. But there are efforts by the left to infiltrate that, and there are already trolls on it doing the same thing they were doing on Twitter to try to stifle conservative voices. And the danger of being on a sort of conservative only or specialized conservative platform is that you could become sort of, to use this term, I guess, ghettoized. You become sort of stuck there. You can't influence the rest of the world. So we are sort of creating a space through which to engage the rest of the world through our own online platforms, Breitbart, and we use our Facebook pages as best we can and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But all these things are under attack. The media are determined to stamp out opposition, and it's necessary for the left to stamp out opposition because they can't actually defend their own policies on their own terms, right? It's very hard to make the case for socialism because it's never succeeded anywhere. But what you do need to do is drown out the people who would oppose it, and that's what this is all about.
Another question that I have for you is, I think you're based in LA, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So UTLA, the teachers union, just voted, according to them, 80% support their vote. There's not a lot of, no way to substantiate it, to shut down the schools, not reopen LAUSD, the second largest school district in the nation, unless they get what they want, which is get rid of charter schools, defund the police, Medicare for all, and a whole bunch of other really hardcore leftist stuff. I don't know if you've got kids in the LA public school system, but let me ask you your reaction to this and, what we're looking at right now. We talk about the institutions, and it seems to me as if the teachers union, in my opinion, are holding the children of Los Angeles hostage.
Yes and no. No, in the sense that I think there are some people who are afraid of sending their kids to school. There just are. Most people, I think, want the schools to reopen, but there is, I should just acknowledge before I go after the teachers union, that there is some segment of the public that really is still frightened by the coronavirus. And it's not a Republican or Democratic thing. The media, of course, treat it like it is. The media focus on the Republican states, Texas and Florida. And they say, oh, you reopened the economy. That's what caused this to happen, right? You reopened businesses. But California is a deep, deep, deep blue Democrat state and really didn't reopen all that much and had a huge spike. And one cause, and LA has actually admitted this, Mayor Garcetti, I asked him the question and he admitted it. One cause was the George Floyd protests. You had these thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people in the streets, few of them wearing masks, very little social distancing, and that contributed to the spread. But that's not even the only reason. I mean, we may find that the reason that there's been a spike could be as simple as really hot temperatures in the summer. In the spring, it's pleasant all over the country and everyone's fine being outdoors. Once you get to midsummer, people in the southern parts of the country, which tend to be a lot hotter and more humid, tend to go indoors. And then you have people gathering indoors and gathering with air conditioning. And we don't really understand exactly how air conditioning interacts with the virus, but it's probably not very good. And here where I live right near the ocean in LA. So I'm very lucky. It never gets above 80 degrees here, never gets below, 55. So we kind of have this temperate climate. But you go 5 miles inland and it's baking hot. It's like 110 degrees. And no one's going to stand outside or have interactions outside in that kind of weather. So I think that we may find it's just as simple as a seasonal variation or variance. But the teachers' unions are so radical. Now, they're radical on everything. I mean, I've been to the National Teachers Union conferences, and they're basically socialists. I mean, they endorse every radical cause you can possibly imagine that has nothing to do with education and nothing to do with the welfare of children. They are part of this intersectional constellation of institutional left-wing organizations. They just parrot the same talking points. They're radical. They want to defund the police. They're not just talking about the LAPD. They're talking about the Los Angeles School Police District, which is its own department. And they succeeded in getting the school board to cut the department by 35%. Now, there are almost 500 employees of this department, officers, civilians, and they keep the schools safe from gangs and from mass shootings, primarily. Gangs, theft, robbery, and so forth, but also mass shootings. I mean, the police are there to protect the kids. In fact, in many neighborhoods in LA, the schools are safer than the neighborhoods because they have their own police force. Now the teachers want to get rid of that police force and replace it with guidance counselors or whatever. It's totally absurd because you're not going to be able to protect the kids. But secondly, why do they want to do that, right? Because the guidance counselors, the other sort of non-police staff they want to bring about, would join the teachers union, right? Or they would join a union associated with them. They wouldn't join the police union. This is also a fight about union dues and pension funds, and it's being waged with children as the pawns. There's no reason not to open the schools. It can be done. The pediatricians, the scientists all say it can be done. Some say it should be done because often, again, schools are safer than, unfortunately, than some homes and some neighborhoods. And the teachers unions just happen to run the city. In LA, we don't have two political parties. We haven't had a Republican mayor in a very long time. We basically have a two-party system within the Democratic Party, which is not really a two-party system. We have the public works unions on the one hand and the police unions, the unions that do things and build things. And we have the teachers unions on the other, the educators. And they fight every election with their preferred candidates. And, the teachers unions are very good at electing their candidates. Let's put it that way. So there's no prospect of school reform, and they're going to keep the schools shut down until it's safe to go back. And I think the teachers believe it's going to be safe to go back if Joe Biden wins the presidency. I mean, frankly, I think a lot of this is political. Again, that's why I had my whole preface about some people have a legitimate fear. But for some people, this is just about the election. They are going on a kind of general strike until Trump leaves office.
You mentioned something, and I talked about it last night on the radio show, that, scientists, pediatricians, and the like, all across the globe, by the way, not just in the United States, maybe minus a few people that you see on CNN and MSNBC, are universally advocating for schools to reopen. And they are reopening across the globe. It's only I think the United States is the only developed country in the world that is planning on not teaching its children this September. And so, you tweeted, and I'll put it up here, reopening business is not the issue. Some states R&D reopened without spikes. Protests in early June shattered discipline. There may also simply be other factors like people heading indoors in the summer heat. Lockdown is not a long-term solution, what you just talked about. But let me ask you from the standpoint of the unions that hold so much political power. I had an anonymous high school teacher from LAUSD call into the show last night, and I talked with him for about 15 minutes. And he's one of the few guys that are out there that are the brave souls that, are against the unions. And he thought Janus was going to solve it, but it seems like they're now bionic. Where and when, unions have always been leftist, it's about the collective, but where and when did they gain so much power that they essentially have taken an entire city hostage? You think about the impact it's going to have, not letting kids to go back to school, on people's jobs, their careers, and their lives.
Well, I mean, there is a point at which it became illegal to organize public employees, and that was the Kennedy administration. Roosevelt, FDR, was opposed to public sector unions because he said correctly that you'd have the same people on either side of the bargaining table. You'd have the unions on one side, and then you'd have the politicians on the other side who needed union votes to get elected. So basically the unions would be negotiating with themselves and the taxpayer would just have to pay whatever for whatever low level of service they got. And Kennedy legalized public service unions. There was also others who contributed and so forth. We've had that in California too. But look, I think people should be able to organize in a union. I just think they shouldn't have the kind of bargaining power they have in California. Now, other states have gone the route of reform. In Wisconsin, Scott Walker basically said you can have teachers' unions, but negotiations are only going to be about wages. There's not going to be negotiations about anything else. It's just wages. You have unions for the purposes of wages and working conditions. That's fine, but not benefits and all these other things. The irony, the unions fought it tooth and nail, but the irony was that because the school districts saved so much money, the unions were running a racket before where they basically had their preferred insurance providers selling the benefits to the school districts. And that was a monopoly controlled by the unions. So once the unions couldn't negotiate benefits anymore and the districts were freed to buy insurance policies for the teachers in other places, the costs went down and the school districts could hire more teachers. So they created more jobs for teachers by making it easier to negotiate with unions, reducing the number of things they had control over. So this is a political problem with a political solution, maybe not in California. And I think that part of the problem we have in California is also the passivity of voters. I mean, it's not just a complaint that, Americans aren't fighting for themselves. There's a kind of educated complicity here, the way the state has been run by Democrats for a long time. California is dominated by Northern California Democrats who tend to be radicals in the San Francisco, Berkeley sort of orbit, like Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom. I mean, almost every politician from California is from Northern California. And Southern California is seen basically as voting fodder, where there's a huge Latino population and they are expected to show up at the polls, but they never get to run anything. They never get to hold any significant positions. The elite Democrat gentry up in the San Francisco Bay Area gets elected with the help of these Latino voters. Thank you very much. You can all go back home now. Your job is done. And it's weird because on the local level, there are efforts by Latino residents and Black residents to try to seize control of the schools. There have been some charter school initiatives. We had a couple of charter school advocates elected to the school board. But again, this toxic culture just affects everything. I mean, I'm not going to name names because I'm not going to just use this opportunity to bash somebody. But there's a member of the school board who I happen to know who got elected on the basis of a reform proposal for charter schools. That guy is one of the two members of the school board advocating hardest now for defunding the police. It's almost like because he got into office supporting charter schools that he has to overcompensate. And he's white from the Northeast somewhere, or he was educated in the Ivy League at least. And it's like overcompensation. He's got to defund the police with Black Lives Matter because he got elected on a charter school platform. I mean, it's just this political culture is toxic, and it just discourages public involvement in any meaningful way. If you don't say the mantras that they want you to say, it's like President Trump said at Mount Rushmore. If you don't say the words, nobody listens to you. I don't know that there's any salvation for these school systems other than for people to find alternatives. And if there's anything good that comes out of this lockdown, it's that people will start schooling at home and start turning to online services, whether on Zoom or YouTube. And my kids have learned a lot. I mean, in this shutdown, my kids have learned everything there is to know about snakes. They watch every single snake video, and they can tell me about every species of snake. I never heard of half of these snakes, but my kids have been watching YouTube videos about snakes. And they asked me for a pet snake, and I kind of drew the line there. But
yeah, I don't know. I'm looking at a lot of reports, and my kids are also online as well. My oldest is in college, and he's doing college classes online now too. My youngest is in high school, and I'm hoping that my county doesn't follow suit of LA County, but I think it would be devastating for the kids if they don't start up school again real soon. But last question for you, and I greatly appreciate you taking the time. Getting back to your book, Red November, talk to us a little bit. First of all, what do you foresee over the next 3-4 months as we lead up to the election? Obviously, the campaign train isn't going to be happening like it was before COVID. And right. You were there, you looked through the debates and saw it from a perspective of being there in person. Asking you to prognosticate a little bit here. What are you seeing firsthand as far as what you expect, A, for the campaign and how that's going to come out? Are we actually going to see debates? And B, I guess the polls aren't looking good right now for Donald Trump. Do you expect him to tighten? And what do you see actually happening on November 3rd?
Well, I think the polls are definitely going to tighten. because there's no way that Trump is as far behind as the polls indicate.
Right.
I do think he's behind, and I think that he's significantly behind. But I also think that people are becoming more and more reluctant to talk to pollsters as a result of this climate of fear that the left has created. And I also think that there's signs in some polls that Trump is actually closing the gap already. But we're going to have a close election, and the reason I say that, it's not going to look like a landslide before Election Day. It could be. I mean, who knows? But I think Donald Trump is making moves now in his campaign. He's shaking things up. I don't know how good or bad a job Brad Parscale did as campaign manager. He's now been replaced by Bill Stepien. But it does show me that Trump is engaged and Trump is trying to win. If he's making changes, swapping people around, he's not going to be content to coast and hope for the best and allow Joe Biden to do whatever Joe Biden does. Donald Trump is in this to win. And that tells me the polls are going to tighten because he's going to change just like he did in 2016. He's going to swap people around. He's going to play with different strategies until he finds what works. And I think that Trump has a good chance of winning re-election. Right now, obviously, the odds are against him. The obstacles are incredible. The media, the tech giants. I mean, Google is determined to make sure Donald Trump never wins again. They actually said that. We broke that story at Breitbart that the Google employees crying the day after the election.
We saw the undercover video.
Yeah, they vowed never to let this happen again. So, when Darth Vader comes along with the Death Star and all you're riding is the Millennium Falcon, you got to be pretty good. So I continue my science fiction metaphors here. I promise I'm not that much of a nerd. But
at least I know those movies.
Yeah, exactly. But Donald Trump, I think, is in a position to win if he wants to. I think he's starting to want to, and he's starting to pull it together. I will say that the circumstances don't favor the re-election of Donald Trump. I think he's actually done a good job on coronavirus. I think he's done a good job at managing the economy with the PPP program and the stimulus checks. I think have kept a lot of people afloat. He's not done the Herbert Hoover thing of just letting the chips fall where they may. This has been an engaged Republican president. Nobody can say he didn't try to help people stay open for business. He didn't try to help people keep their salaries. So I think he's given himself a chance to win, but the obstacles are incredible. Even then, coronavirus, economic damage, race riots, what next? I almost tweeted the other night, but I don't like to be too glum. But there was an article in the LA Times about how our risk for an earthquake just went up to 2.5%. Normally it's kind of like around 1%, but it increased because there was some slippage of some fault out in the Santa Clarita Valley. I thought, just what we need now, like another natural disaster on top of everything else. But, I think that he's just got a way forward. And I don't think Biden does. Biden's campaign slogan is build back better. What does that even mean? Build back. I understand it sort of means recovery, but he's looking back. He's talking about, he said, the second great railroad age. That's what he wants to build. It's first of all, the idea that railroads are, the technology of the 21st century is just ridiculous. And secondly, they tried that already with the stimulus. Biden was in charge of this high-speed rail stuff, and it went nowhere. And Governor Gavin Newsom here in California, the most left-wing state in the country, canceled our high-speed rail, and he said point blank, we can't afford it, and it's not going to do anything for us. And he wanted to like it, but he just canceled it in his first speech to the legislature. And Biden wants to bring it back. How's he going to do it? It's all backward looking. It's all old utopian vision. So I just think that Trump's got a case to make if he makes it. And I think if he makes it well, he'll win.
Do you think the debates happen?
Interesting. I think one debate happens. I don't know that they'll get all three. It's a great question. I think Biden has in principle agreed to 3, but I think they're trying to find a way to squirrel out of it. Yeah. And I think they're going to do 1.
Karen Tumulty at the New York Times is already writing articles suggesting that the debates are archaic and they're outdated and they're racist. I don't know how she connected that, but they're scared to death because they know that Biden without a teleprompter and the puppet strings against Trump, it's going to, I think that's where the election turns.
Here's the other problem with Biden in a debate. And you can see this actually. I put a little video out about my book. And you may have seen the video already, but I confronted Biden on the campaign trail. And people think of him as sort of an affable, backslapping kind of guy. But when he gets confronted, he gets really angry. He loses his temper. Yeah, he loses his temper. And I think that if he's faced with Trump, Biden's going to sort of lose it. Now, he could pull all these antics successfully with Paul Ryan. Remember that debate with Paul Ryan where Paul Ryan tried to stay cool and calm and Biden made these clownish gestures and the audience thought Biden won because he kept laughing at Paul Ryan. I don't know that today's Biden could pull that off. And I think Trump kind of gets to Biden in a way. And I think they're afraid that Biden might lose his temper. I should say this, and I point this out in the book, Biden never went to the spin room once after any of the debates. The candidates come down to the spin room, they talk to the journalists. Biden never did, either because it was too late at night and he had to go to bed, or because he was just afraid of gaffes. And I think that any gaffe could have ended his campaign. So that's interesting. He's not comfortable in a spontaneous setting.
Joel Pollak, tell everybody where they could find you on Twitter, the book on Amazon. We'll have the links here below for everybody to click on and get your book.
You can follow me on Twitter or Parler at Joel Pollak, just my first and last name. And the book is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, centerstreet.com, just about anywhere you can find books. But I really appreciate your effort today, and I really appreciate everyone who goes out and buys the book. Red November is the title. So
Red November. Will the country vote red for Trump or red for socialism? And follow Joel as well over at Breitbart. He is the senior editor at large and also host of Breitbart News Sunday on Sirius XM Patriot. Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back on again down the road, and maybe we can connect down in LA when I'm down there. I don't live too far, so I appreciate you taking the time, Joel.
Thanks so much.
Well, that was amazing. Those two interviews just flew by. I don't know about you, but I could have spoken with each of them a couple of more hours each. Joel, thank you so much. Best of luck with Red November, and hopefully it will be a Red November across the board. And also, thank you very much to Brad Thore and his latest book, Near Dark. Best of luck with that as well. Folks, let us know what you think in the comment sections here at Ricochet or YouTube, or find us on Rage Broadcasting, or please find us on Apple Podcasts. Give us a like and a comment. It helps the algorithms find us as well. We're going to be back again real soon. Got some fascinating guests lined up here at Whiskey Politics. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Cheers.